You see it?
Yeah.
I see it!
Oh, there it's coming. Perfect.
The Dead Hand, The Untold Story of the Cold War, Arms Race, and Its Dangerous Legacy by David E. Hoffman. After reading books like this, it's surprising that there's even humans still around. The book outlines the events leading up to and around the arms race during the Cold War. And when I say arms race, I don't necessarily mean just the nuclear weapons. Of course, it does get into that, but it's also a lot of viral weaponry and chemical. And probably worst of all, the book outlines all the big egos that actually make the decisions on where this stuff is manufactured, how it's manufactured, and who controls it. The book actually starts out with an outbreak, an anthrax outbreak down the street from one of their manufacturing plants, in addition to a near catastrophe when the Russian satellites registered a launch coming over the horizon over the poles. Now sadly, the anthrax outbreak actually did happen and a whole bunch of people died, but as the order to launch was going down up the chain of command and to the person that actually pushed the button, thankfully the guy that was actually in charge of actually launching it was smart enough to notice some inconsistencies with the readings he was getting from the satellites. Also, it was at a time when the sun was just barely peeking over the horizon and the readings weren't necessarily going to be very accurate. As it turned out, because this guy hesitated and swore it was a false alarm, it ended up being just a flock of birds. And because of that, he was able to spare us from World War III. Now, sadly, all through this book, there's lots and lots of examples of various presidents and people in charge, various presidents making threats, weapons being developed in answer to rumors of possible other weapons being developed by, say, the United States, and back and forth they go. A lot of tough talk from very proud, arrogant individuals. I would not use the word entertaining to describe this book. Terrifying is probably a better fit. For example, it lays out the various tactics used in war. Conventional costs about $2,000 for every person it kills. Nuclear costs about $800, but biological costs only $1. Therefore, Russia had extensive facilities dedicated to just that, weaponizing things like smallpox, mass production of anthrax, and also diseases that were designed to have a two-part way of killing you. You had one where it weakened the immune system and a secondary that actually killed you. It was very odd the way the author describes it. Also, the scientist made and designed various diseases that would resist antibiotics and figured out ways to place them on warheads or simply sending someone infected into a populated U.S. city. Also, with anthrax, they were able to figure out just how to get the spores the right size so it would burrow deep into the lungs and not get stuck by the upper filtration, thus making it more lethal. And oddly enough, a lot of the Russian scientists were roped into working on stuff like this because they thought they were working at places that were supposed to understand the diseases so that they could make better treatments against it, inoculations. But after a while, they realized what they were actually working on, and as a result, a lot of them defected. Biological weapons being referred to as the poor man's nuke. Also, the Soviet Union was very unstable at this time period. The leadership was on very thin ice and always seemed like they were very close to having their own coup. Also, money was a big issue. Also, the book outlines what happened when the Soviet Union finally collapsed. The borders changed. Scientists weren't paid. They complained that dairy farmers were paid more than nuclear scientists. People started to starve, which was a very bad thing because now all these nuclear scientists and viral weapons specialists started to be acquired by other countries like North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. Oddly enough, it does also mention that they were working on a laser so powerful it could shoot satellites out of space, which oddly enough, I think the US Navy has a ship-mounted laser that they use to disable ships or small boats. And that's all the stuff, you have to wonder, that's all the stuff that's been declassified over the years. So if they were to have that kind of stuff now and it's common knowledge, what do they actually have for weapons? Back in the 80s, the Star Wars was a big thing. When Reagan was around, there was a big debate on should they have weapons platforms in space. Thankfully, that's all illegal now. But a lot of illegal stuff was happening during the Cold War. It wouldn't surprise me if the same is true today. Like I said, the book is kind of terrifying, knowing that all this stuff happened and probably is currently happening. But one of the things I didn't like about this book is that it did seem very one-sided, very much the US reacting to all this shady stuff that Russia was doing, all the blunders Russia had. It does mention some about the US, but it does seem a little bit one-sided. It was a very good book. Kind of long. I imagine if it was so detailed that it mentioned every blunder, it would be easily 2-3 times the length. But for more on that, I strongly recommend reading the book Command and Control, in which they talk about the Titan missile project and how one guy dropped a socket at the top of it that was working on it ended up puncturing the rocket and destabilizing to the point where it exploded and blew the nuke like a half a mile away and landed in some farm field. Also, I think in that same base mentioned in that book, there was a guy that was testing the security of the base, the integrity of it, and was able to break in using only his credit card. Now, granted, the credit card got him past the first few locks, and then he bluffed his way all the way to the command center, and he was probably a professional con man, but still, it shouldn't be that easy. I keep that in mind when you read this and you get to the end of the book and they talk about when the Soviet Union collapsed and the borders changed, there was literal tons of enriched uranium being guarded by nothing more than a padlock. And by chance, the U.S. was approached, or members of the various scientific teams were approached to purchase the materials. And just by chance, they ended up going through the rest of the warehouse and finding other crates with nuclear materials with shipping labels on them to deliver it to Iraq. All those nuclear secrets and materials were up for grabs in the early 90s. And just with what's going on with North Korea now, it's not hard to imagine that maybe some of the scientists actually made it there, especially considering that they were starving in Russia. But for me personally, I think that the viral weaponry is by far the most terrifying. First of all, it's way cheap and extremely hard to trace. It's very easy for a country to use something like that and develop it, and then also deny that they had anything to do with it. Whereas a nuke, the materials can be traced and they're extremely expensive to produce, which is why Russia put a lot of stock in it. Very interesting book, but like I said, kind of terrifying. Command and Control was one that I would also recommend, but that one focuses more on nukes, where this one focuses more on various weapons developed, weapons platforms. But like I said, it uses Russia as kind of a punching bag, whereas Command and Control is kind of more about the blunders of the United States. And trust me, there is plenty on both sides. Also, what's chilling is the book does make a small mention that this is what's been declassified, which makes you wonder what else is going on behind closed doors with these governments and these shady weapons deals. As far as the writing goes, the author builds a good narrative based on his historical data. But like I said, it's not exactly the entertaining kind of book. More of just an informative one to just give you nightmares. And there's things about it that remind me of where North Korea is at in their missile development, nuke development. And I can't help but wonder this is what it's like going on in North Korea as they develop their new ICBMs. I'm a firm believer that nonfiction books like this are far more terrifying than anything Stephen King has ever written. I'll post links down below to the two other books, Command and Control and Atomic Accidents, which are very similar to this one. All are very good, as well as a link to this one. And if you have read it, let me know what you think in the comments below. And I'll talk to you next time.